So I also am joined today by my esteemed colleagues, Jeffrey Burns and Taylor Laporte, who are some of our customer success engineers who really know how to do schema markup strategies in their sleep. I'm also honored to be joined by my co-founder and the creator of Schema App, Mark Van Berkel, who is another resident expert who will be jumping into Q&A to answer any questions you have. So question comes up anytime throughout the presentation. You'll see if you actually look at the Zoom, there's a Q&A button. Go ahead and click on that, ask your question, and Mark, Jeff, and Taylor will be happy to answer it. At the end of the presentation, we'll also have a time to cover some of the questions live, and so we'll go through those. And if anything we don't address today, feel free to reach out to us. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. Today's agenda starts with Schema Markup 101. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page with regards to what is Schema Markup, we'll take a moment to go through that. Next, we'll dive into our primary topic, developing a schema markup strategy. And this includes our objective of helping you understand exactly what content you should mark up with schema markup and why. Then we'll cover two other topics lightly, and we'll delve into these, I think, in future webinars. The first is around connecting content. So how do you actually make sure that things are really understood and how they relate to one another? This is really a principle that we believe heartedly in at Schema App. And so we'll show you the basics of how to do that, as well as share some schema markup best practices to keep in mind as you journey on your schema markup journey. Again, we'll end up with a Q&A. So a little bit about me. My name is Martha Van Berkel. I am one of the co-founders at Schema App. You can see this is my knowledge graph. So it tells you that prior to starting Schema App, I spent 14 years at Cisco. So I've lived that enterprise world trying to get things done with IT and developers. My education is from Queen's University and MIT. So I do have a background that's very technical in mathematics and engineering, but my passion is really around strategy and innovation. So talking about schema markup strategy is something I love to do. I am Canadian, and I used to own a beautiful 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. And well, why do I mention this? Well, the reason knowledge graphs are interesting in that schema markup informs is that it can tell you interesting things about a company. And in my case, my Austin Healey that I used to drive was actually a star in the movie Losing Chase that was directed by Kevin Bacon. And so anyone who plays the game of 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon will realize that I'm actually 2 degrees from Kevin Bacon, making you 3 degrees from Kevin Bacon, and hopefully helping you win that game in the future. So a little bit about me and my knowledge graph, but also to make the point that when you connect your information, you can learn interesting things that we can learn, but so can the robots and search engines. So let's jump into Schema Markup 101. Schema markup, also known as structured data, we use those terms interchangeably. And schema markup is really a vocabulary defined at schema.org. And this vocabulary isn't new. It was created by Google, Yahoo, Bing, and Yandex all the way back in 2011. And there's really 800 different definitions of things or classes, and I'll go into a bit more detail there. And schema markup is really translating your content into a standard vocabulary, just like you would translate something from English to French. We're going to use schema markup to really translate into the language of search engines. And as you may know, when you translate it, it actually helps the search engines explicitly understand or truly understand the meaning of what that content is and how it relates to other things on your website or on the web. Now, within schema.org, there's these things called classes. Now, classes are really what we define as like the thing. So you've probably heard of organization, person, creative work, event, article. And then there's properties that we use to define these classes. So for example, the person would have a name. Then there's also these things called subclasses. So on the right-hand side, you'll actually see the tree that we have in Schema App because I think it helps you visually understand, thing is the most generic. And then if we have an organization, you'll see there's all these different types of organizations. Local business may be one that you're familiar with. And then a subclass would be sort of, a further class. So the sports team is a subclass of sports organization, which is a type of organization, which is a type of thing. And we mentioned sports team because that's the example we're going to use today. If you go to schema.org, it does read a little bit like a dictionary in a foreign language, and part of it is just getting familiar on where things are described. So the class that we were just talking about here is a coffee or coffee shop, and then you can see the thing, organization, local business, food established, coffee shops. That's sort of how you can see how they're related within schema.org. And then here you can see the properties are listed on the left-hand side. And these properties are really, think of the ways that you can describe the class and the way that you're going to get into the details about the content. So that's schema.org. What you're likely most familiar with is that Google has these features. There's about 28 of them, and they're constantly evolving, that are features that you can get rich results in search if you add structured data for those specific classes. So you'll notice here, article, breadcrumb, book, these actually all exist within schema.org. And so we'll talk a little bit about these features and how they play a role in developing your schema markup strategy. Now, the reason why people know the features is because when you adopt those features and add the structured data for those things, you get results in search. And so these, again, are constantly evolving. Some of these, you can see we have the ratings, aggregate ratings, as well as the price for a product, or perhaps the corporate contact information on the right for Starbucks. And recently, actually, Bill Slawski published an article that was reviewing one of the Google patents that said that answers in search, or what we call feature snippets, are also informed by unstructured and structured data. Here's an old one from Hunch Manifest, which is the name of our company, and an infographic about what is semantic search marketing, which is really the basis of what we're talking about today. But most importantly, just like my knowledge graph tells a story about who I am, your schema markup actually connects to tell a story about the business or the website that you're in. And when you understand these pieces, it can actually drive amazing results. And from our work with enterprise clients on a very broad range, we're seeing the impact not only in impressions and click-through rate, but actually through the entire customer journey, including rank. There was an article this week that said, it's unconclusive whether structured data or schema markup impacts rank. We are actually seeing it impact rank for our clients. And we're actually seeing it not just impact people spending time on the page, but also whatever that conversion is, ideally resulting in higher revenue. So the reason we do schema markup is to really drive business and people to our business, because it's then understood. So what I thought I'd do as we get into the schema markup strategy is to talk a little bit about the schema markup process. Now, most people think you do schema markup once, you're done, excellent, go drink a coffee. But in fact, your strategy is just the beginning of this cyclical cycle of trying to both create your schema markup, deploy it, maintain it, and then use it in order to add more value to your business. Today, we're going to focus our conversation on the top square where we began at strategy. What schema markup should you do? But Schema App, we really are passionate about automating and reusing everything across the entire process through authoring, deployment, maintenance, reporting, analytics, and then eventually recommending strategy. And if you do a knowledge graph properly with your schema markup, you can also reuse that graph to accelerate other initiatives, but that's for another day and another conversation. What is a schema markup strategy? I thought I'd start here so that we're all on the same page as we go through the process. So I like to think of the schema markup strategy as figuring out what content for a business needs to be understood by search engines or other bots in order to achieve your business goals. Notice the word business is really central here. We're going to start with the first step of the schema markup strategy, not talking about Google features, not talking about search metrics, but in talking about the business, because it's really sort of driving those business goals that makes this both interesting and worth the investment. The other piece that I want you to remember is that schema markup strategy and content strategy are really tied at the hip. They both inform each other and themselves have a cycle. So listen as I go through this process for where I call out the opportunity to say, oh, look, this is where schema markup's influencing the type of content you need to add or change on the website, or the reverse, where the content's actually driving the schema markup strategy. So what you're seeing here is actually the 5 steps of the grid we're going to use in order to develop a process. Now, I like to believe you could do this on the back of an envelope. I don't know if anyone ever gets mail anymore, so think of it maybe on the back of a flyer or a back of a piece of paper that you have. But the idea here is that it shouldn't be complicated. It shouldn't be a 12-page document explaining why you do it, but instead something that you can sit down with a business leader to talk about, what is it about the business that you're trying to drive engagement with, conversion to, or help be found and understood in order to drive their goals. So we're going to walk through, how you identify the key business concepts that need to be found and understood. What is it? And we're going to kind of, how do you translate that into schema.org? Where does it exist on the website, or where does it not exist? Again, inform strategy. How does it align to Google features? And then finally, what's the ease of implementation? And really the goal at the end of this is that we can help you prioritize the type of content that you should optimize with Schema Markup in order to get the best results. All right, so let's jump in. Step 1, key business concepts. All right, so this is not where we sit down again and geek out on what is it about Schema Markup or a feature that we want, but let's instead ask the questions around what are the really important aspects of a business. Now I'll tell you a story. I was looking at a website, a financial website recently, and I was looking through the different content on the site, and I was like, these are the 4 types of things that stand out based on the website. But then I asked, what is actually strategic for this business? Where do they want to grow this year? And they're like, oh, actually, we really want to drive people to our content, and we really want to drive people to this one type of financial product that we have. And it was so interesting because without that insight, we probably would have prioritized the content in the Schema Markup differently. So it really is that, what is about the business that's unique? What are they trying to sell, and to whom? How do they make money? Where are they seeing the most conversion today? What specific questions are their customers looking for or asking? Perhaps that's through customer service, through the sales team, or perhaps through chats or other forums outside. And the other one I love is what is the strategic focus for the business? Most businesses make a goal for the year on where they want to see that growth. And it tends to not be we just want to see growth, but instead we want to see growth in our enterprise sales for this specific type of product, or we're going to do a big focus on this industry to try to drive that revenue. And so really in this first step, it's really about understanding what are those things, what are the key business things that are really important for the business to be found. Now, it's hockey playoff season, and we're a Canadian company. So we thought, who else should we use for an example but our own local hockey team that's just made it into our conference final, called the Guelph Storm. Now, what I love about this website is that it's not perfect, and there's lots of opportunities in it. But what it does give me is allows us to ask these questions with a hockey team. So hopefully some of you have a favorite sports team, so you can understand the type of things that they would want to be found or understood or engaged with in order to make money and to be successful. So we're going to go through this process for the Guelph Storm. So when we think about the key business concepts, the first is the Guelph Storm themselves, right? So they're a hockey team. They recruit players. So their players are sometimes who people know and why they follow them. They host these sporting events called hockey games, where they want to sell tickets in order to fill seats and make money and kind of get the crowd excited. They want to share their news. So for example, they just posted that they've recruited a Russian star to come and join the Guelph Storm this coming year. They also sell products so that parents like myself can spend their money to buy and dress their children in storm outfits. And then they also have really great alumni. And I happen to be a little biased on the Guelph Storm alumni because 2 of them are 2 big LA Kings. So Dustin Brown and Drew Doughty. So, when I found out they used to play for the Storm, I was really proud to be from Guelph. But what you can see is that you can see this isn't sort of a long sentences or long paragraphs, but what are some of those key things? And these are often on the website, right, under key headers. So you can see here, they have news and tickets and team and videos and community and fan zone. But more importantly, it's important to get these from the people in the business to say, what is it that's driving their business or that they want to see growth in? So the first thing you're going to do is write those under key business concepts. Now we're going to go to step 2. Now step 2 is where we translate from real world into what is this in the words of schema.org? Now, Mark Van Berkel, the creator of Schema App, used to always say that the best people to do schema markup are philosophers, because they ask the question of, what is this thing? Well, you're going to do exactly the same thing for those concepts that you've described. And what we want to do is be as specific as possible. Let me give you an example. So if we look on the right, again, this is the tree out of Schema App that shows sort of how all the schema.org classes relate to one another. Now in Schema App, I can just search for sports team, or you can go to schema.org and search for sports and see what comes up. But what you can see here is, I know it's an organization, and then, oh, look, they have a sports organization, but even under sports organization, they have something called a sports team. So a sports team is the most specific way that we can describe the Guelph Storm. The same will go in the example as we talk about a hockey game. It's not just an event, but it's actually a sporting event. So you want to get used to not just asking what's the generic piece, such as organization, but getting really specific about what type of organization it is. And so what we're going to do in this next step is really take all those key business concepts and try to translate them into how is that described within schema.org. Now, there is also a page on schema.org that has all the list of all the classes, so it's perhaps easier visually to kind of see it. Or again, if you're using Schema App, you can use our tree. The other thing that you may want to do here is look at the actual content of the page to inform your decision. When we were looking at the Guelph Storm, we were looking at, let's say, our sponsorships page. We were like, well, what is it? Is a sponsorship? Is it a product we're selling? But in fact, on the sponsorships page, they had more of just a contact form. And so perhaps a buy action or an action of Schema Markup would have been more appropriate. So as you go through this, you want to actually look at the content on the page, because that might also inform the decision on what it is, or perhaps maybe make a recommendation for a content change that you want to have on that page. Again, where Schema Markup and that content strategy really play key. So what we've done for our Guelph Storm hockey team here is to say, the Guelph Storm is a sports team, so really specific. The players are people or person is a schema.org piece. Hockey games are a sports event. Again, not the generic event, but as most specific as I can get. The tickets are indeed a product. The news, here there is news article or blog posting. They're mostly blogs on their blog and not necessarily calling out specific events. As well as calling out merchandise. The products are merchandise and products, and then the alumni are also people. So again, the next thing you want to do here is just understand, well, what is this thing in the terms of schema.org? So here you're sort of doing that human translation into schema.org. Now again, remember, if you have questions, feel free to post those in the Q&A. Taylor, Jeff, and Mark are standing by in order to make sure that you get your answers. All right, step 3. Where does this information reside on the website? I love this step, because often you'll actually go and talk to someone and say, well, what is that key thing that you're trying to sell or grow? And we were working with this one client that was in a very specialized area of science around titration. And it turned out they had 6 different pages that talked about the work that they do around this topic of titration. And so when we asked them, we were like, well, what one page do you want your customers to go to in order to understand what you do around titration? And they didn't have a great answer. And so really one of the first things you want to do is understand, does a page exist that talks about this primary content? And if it doesn't, you should create one, again, informing content. If it does, is there one specific page, or is the information perhaps in different places? And if it is in different places, again, it's an opportunity to say, does it make more sense to have one page that's best known for this business concept? And this makes sense, right? Search engines are trying to understand the customer's intent and match them with the most specific piece of information to help them get their answer. And so if you have that information spread across different pages, and so it's not absolutely clear exactly which page is the right one, then it makes it very difficult both for the user to get their answer, but also for the search engines to point them there. Now, this also means it'll come up in our best practices, is that when we do the schema markup, when you have one page that's known about that concept and you optimize it with just the schema markup for that concept, it'll be explicit and absolutely clear. So one of our best practices is to make sure not to put schema markup, the same schema markup on all pages, since that becomes then confusing about which page is indeed the right one. So let's go ahead and have a look at what this looks like for the Guelph Storm. So again, we went back to the Guelph Storm website and we're like, okay, the sports team primarily is spoken about on their homepage. The players are all listed under their roster page. The hockey games are on the schedule. Now, what's interesting about the Guelph Storm site is that their tickets go to a subdomain, tickets.guelphstorm.com. Their news is actually pulling in from WordPress for articles with or pages with the tag articles. Merchandise is actually going to a Shopify store that's again under an entirely different domain. And then the alumni are primarily under Storm Alumni. Now, when you go through the pages on the website, you'll perhaps then notice also if there's consistency in those pages. Are they actually using all the same template? Is it free-form information or is it structured in some way? Are there one of those version of those page or many? Are they on different platforms? So through the process of going through where this content resides on the site, you're not only going to understand if the content is centralized, but also where it actually lives with regards to a bit of the technology, which will help you when you're answering our fifth column around ease of implementation. You also might discover that it's not on the website. In that case, then it's an opportunity to create that content. All right, step 4, Google features. Now, I love that this is step 4 because most people, when I talk about, what are you doing for your schema markup strategy, this is where they start. Now, imagine we've gone through quite a lot of other discussion and discovery around what's important to the business prior to getting to the Google features. Now, the Google features are very important in that they help you be found in search. They help you stand out in search and have an influence on sort of getting more impressions and click-through rates. But it's not the only thing that you want understood because, Google only calls out this short list with regards to, the type of features that they offer. So if you're a service-based business, and let's say you work globally, so you have a central, corporation, and you don't have a local business and you're not selling products, you'd be like, actually, I shouldn't optimize anything with schema markup because Google doesn't have a feature for services. When in fact, there's robust schema markup to describe your service and the areas that you serve that will help you get found and understood more easily. So what we like to do in this step is first ask the question of what Google features do the key business concepts qualify for. So the content that you've already identified, do any of those qualify for any of these features? And if they do, what content do you need to either add or change in order to make sure that you're getting the most out of it? The other question then we ask is what additional features could you achieve? Perhaps it wasn't a main key concept, but perhaps you do have a lot of videos or you have a community where people are answering questions and sort of upvoting questions. And so perhaps there's other opportunities for you to call these out. Perhaps you offer courses or you have job postings that you're trying to, or you're paying a lot for advertising to fill. Imagine if you could drive more organic traffic to those job postings and help fill that talent pool. And so the first thing we're going to do is actually go through and say, which ones of these do you qualify for? And then we're going to kind of work backwards. So here we're going to look at the Guelph Storm and their sports team. So this is a sports team, so it's under organization. So they do actually, the social profiles and corporate contact actually fall under organization. Now, what's interesting on the Guelph Storm page is that there's actually no contact information on it. Their profiles are in the footer, but about nothing else. In fact, there's not even a description on the page about who the Guelph Storm is. It's just lots of pretty pictures. And so that's an opportunity. So what I've highlighted in bold is that, while the social profiles are there, there's an opportunity for them to get corporate contact. And so how do we sort of maybe make some recommendations to add a description and add some of these other things that you would need in order to qualify for that corporate contact feature? Now, Person doesn't have a Google feature, but events do. And so you can see we call that events. Tickets are a type of product, so that could do for the product feature. News, blog postings are a subclass of article, so article is the right one for this. And then for merchandise, they can get products and then also reviews. But we noticed on Spike Sports Shop that they don't have reviews today. And so again, we kind of called this out as an opportunity for them to collect reviews because that would further enhance how they show up in search and therefore help them drive more organic traffic to those products and ideally convert those to sales. And then finally, alumni in person. But as we look through it, we hadn't called out the video replays as a key business concept, but there's a great rich result that you can get for that. So we actually then said, there's a Google feature for videos, does that content exist? It turns out it does. And so how do we add that in? And so we do, suggest going through each of these and seeing sort of which one makes sense for the website you're working on to make sure that you're indeed getting the most out of it. And for example, we used to just list our job postings on our one career site. Now we have them each on their own page. We add Schema Markup for them. So indeed they can be discovered by other platforms and crawled and understood, as well as we get the rich snippet kind of pointing to us. Local business, maybe if you have different locations, a really big one. Logo actually falls under corporate contacts. Product QA page, recipes, review snippets. This used to show up a lot under articles. They've actually removed that recommendation there today. And then some of these ones that have these kind of test tubes next to them are in beta. But these are constantly changing. There's a great article in SEO Skeptic that you can see sort of schema markup changes, and we can tweet those out after this if you're interested in following those. So after you look at the Google features, you have a comprehensive list, not of just the things that are important for the business, and maybe you've informed content changes as a result of the things that you want to be found for, but perhaps you've also added additional things to your list that you can qualify for those rich results for. All right, everyone still with me? We're coming to the last step. So as we said earlier, schema markup is an iterative process. It really goes through those stages of being able to identify what's important, deploying them, maintaining them. Like I said, Google changes their recommendations and adds new ones on a regular basis. And most businesses are also changing, sort of adding additional content, changing their websites, adding new services, new products, etc. And so what we like to do when we think about a rollout plan is to identify the schema markup that's high value and has a low development cost, or that also is going to get the highest return, and then continue to go through that iteration. So we often do this phased with our customers, again, starting with the thing that's going to have the biggest impact and then working through sort of other concepts on their site. And so when exploring implementation options, the first thing we look at is is the content recurring or is it on a template? So for example, how many pages are there that are for merchandise, or perhaps for QA page, or perhaps how many local businesses you have. And part of this is understanding, the way you implement schema markup on a single page versus many pages is quite different. The other thing we ask is, do you have built-in capabilities on the CMS or theme or add-ons or third-party tools available? So for example, for Guelph Storm, they have WordPress and Shopify, and so there's some out-of-the-box capabilities. They could use Schema App's WordPress plugin or a Shopify app that would allow them to, have no need to engage a developer, but instead, have their teams be able to do that and have that optimized immediately. And then the last question is, how do you want to implement? And we do bring this up because, if you have a back-end developer, you'd use a server-side script, a front-end developer, a tag manager, or if you like to have your marketing SEO team be able to do it yourself, you might use a tool like Schema App. But all these things come into play with regards to whether it's easy to get done, hard, or whether there's a way to automate it. And we tend to think, let's do the easy things first, as well as if they're high value to the organization and can get you a Google feature. So what we've done on the Guelph Storm site is we've assumed we're using Schema App. We're presenting, right? So why not use our own tool and make our digital marketers' life easy? And so what we've done is actually gone through and just said, is it easy, medium, or hard? And then in our case, we've actually said, how are we going to do it? So for the homepage, because they're on WordPress and because we have our editor, we would say that one's pretty easy. It's a single page. For the players, there's a bit of inconsistency and sort of there's a bit of content work that would need to be done in order to fully capitalize on the person's schema markup. So we put this sort of medium and we'd use our highlighter since that does template pages very easily. Then for our hockey games, again, medium and highlighter since it's a list of games, so we wouldn't want to have to manually write that out. For the tickets, again, easy with our editor. News, again, we use the WordPress plugin. The merchandise, we'd use the Shopify app. Video replays could also be used with the WordPress plugin. And then alumni, again, we would want to add some additional content to that and then use the highlighter. And then we would magically reorder these and say, oh, in phase one, we're going to do tickets, news, merchandise, and video replays because they all get a Google feature and they're high value to the business. And some of these have multiple different, there's lots of content here. And then in phase two, that would give us time to add that additional content we want to do to really get the most out of the markup. And then we go ahead and use the Schema App highlighter in order to do those pieces. And so this really gives you your schema markup strategy, informed by the business, right? Identified sort of what, again, you can get additional value from Google, and then at kind of ease of implementation, what makes the most sense based on either the timing of the resources that you have, the capabilities you can do out of box, or perhaps working with a third party like us in order to sort of walk, run, sprint. All right, so hopefully this isn't something that's so complicated that you can't go and turn around, either do it on your own website or one of your clients, or kind of check in if you've done your schema markup already. What are maybe some additional opportunities perhaps in the content, or with regards to what's important to the business or new Google features that will help you further enhance your schema markup and get the best results. All right, so we're right on time here. Moving into our next topic. So our next topic is really around connecting content. Now, when we talk about connecting content, this is the difference between having what I like to call islands of code versus having a knowledge graph, where you're being very explicit about how things relate to one another. And the reason we think this is really important is perhaps because we're a semantic technology company underneath, which is basically the same type of technology Google uses to understand and connect the dots and understand relationships between things. But perhaps it's also because we really see that when schema.org was created as a vocabulary, the intent was to explain how these things are related. And I'm going to give you some examples so where you see that already in sort of even Google's features, and then some best practices and some tools to help you do what I call proper schema markup that's really nicely connected and then appropriately tells your story. So for each content type, what we want to do is ask, how does this thing relate to one another? So let's keep in the theme of our Guelph Storm website. So for example, we have a blog posting. I was saying how they had a recent blog posting about acquiring this new player from Russia that's going to be joining our team. And so the blog posting could use the property about to say that the blog posting is about the sports organization, so Guelph Storm, or perhaps about the person that they just joined, or our team lost 3 games and then came back to win 4. So perhaps the blog posting would be about that sports event or those specific games. And so again, the blog posting is being connected to those things that it's about. A video object could also be about a sports event. So if it's a video replay, the video object perhaps would be about that specific video object, or about that specific, not video, but about the specific sports event. The sports event could also be organized by a sports organization. So the hockey game is organized by the Guelph Storm, would be how you sort of connect those two. And then you see this a lot around, products. And we often get asked, like, how do you connect a product back to the company? Because the product itself can't be connected. There's no way that those things relate. However, you can identify using our tool, the schema paths, which I'll show you an example, which is available for free on the website, to figure out how these things are connected. So it turns out a product has an offering, and that's the price. So think of offer as just, has a property price. So that's how you make sure that the product has a price. And the sports organization can make an offer. So the sports organization, so Guelph Storm can offer the price of an item offered, which is a toque or a woolly hat that I'm going to show you, which then relates it there. So this gets really complicated, and especially when you try to manually figure this out. And so I was looking back in our blog, and I think it was in 2015, Mark created this tool because he got really tired of trying to figure this out in his head. And so he actually created a tool. If you Google schema paths, you'll see it again on our website, and it allows you to pick those 2 things. So when you fill out that column of what is this thing, here I have a local business and a video object. We're like, how do we create these things? I have this great video about my local business. and then it will come up with a way to relate them. So here the local business has subject of creative work, which video object inherits. So a local business is subject of, and then you can link to the video. And if you're a Schema App user, I know a lot of our clients signed up to join today. We sort of force you to do this when you use our Schema App editor, where we say like, oh, you need to connect this to something else. And that way then you build that beautiful graph that tells your story. So check out Schema Paths. It's a great way to sort of learn how to do this. And then ideally you're sort of using a generator or something like Schema App to create the code. And so let me show you what it looks like in the code, although we're not going to read the code, so don't worry. This is what I did sort of in prep for today in Schema App. So I went to Spikes Online. So this is what in Canada we call a toque. So a woolly hat for the Guelph storm, and it has very basic information. It has its name. Again, it's like actually some of the content on the page is actually white on white, so you can't read it. So feedback for the Guelph storm, Spikes Online, to make it a bit more readable. And so what we did is I went into Schema App and just created and say, well, it's a product. It has an image, and so it pulls the file and height and width, to tell me what the image is. So again, we're relating the image to an image object, connecting those. It has a price, and so I want to make sure that the offer is defined that says it's in stock, and that it has $29.99 Canadian available. And then it has, item offered, so it links that back to the product. And then it's of the brand. So I wanted to call out that the brand was the sports organization. The brand is indeed Guelph Storm. And what we did when we did this is that Guelph Storm also is defined. So here the sports organization is here, and we actually found a Wikipedia link about the Guelph Storm. So what a great way to connect the dots for Google by saying that, oh, this sports organization called Guelph Storm that we talk about here on guelphstorm.com is indeed the same organization as Guelph Storm defined in Wikipedia. And so this is us being explicit and very clear that saying, hey, Google, these are the same thing. Connect those dots. And so if anyone's looking for Guelph Storm, you can be sure that this is indeed the toque that's about the organization, but the organization that you have defined also in Wikipedia. And so this, what we call like embedded or connected schema markup is really proper schema markup. And so whenever you're going through your strategy and you're actually starting to then go do the schema markup, you want to keep in mind thinking about like, how do I connect things together? So how do I connect it back to the primary organization? How do I connect it to topics or players or other key business concepts? And in a future webinar, we'll actually go into this topic with a lot more examples to help you understand how to do that properly. So the last thing I have on the agenda is to talk a little bit about best practices. Now, again, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here, but if you leave with anything on a checklist, if you're doing this today or if you've already done it, what are some of the things that you should just keep in mind? So the first is use JSON LD. So way back when we first started, Google only supported microdata, and Bing actually just caught up and started supporting JSON LD more recently. So use JSON LD. It is what is preferred by Google, and it makes a lot of sense. JSON LD is where the code is in a block on the page versus being sort of threaded through the HTML on the page. And so if you're a robot, you can imagine it's a lot easier to digest like a big block of code versus having to go through an entire page. So it's more efficient for the search engines, for the bots, as well as also allows you as a marketer to see it more clearly. And like I was showing you in this example, it's not hard to read as it's sort of all in one block and be like, oh, I may not know what all the code means, but I can read the words. And here I'm describing a brand called a sports organization with these properties. The other one we talked about earlier is using the most specific class possible. And this is where we see, especially people who are using plugins that are maybe sort of generic plugins who will add organization markup on every page or organization markup just for everyone because that's what they've built in. You want to be really thoughtful about using the specific class. Again, this is maybe where Schema App's different. We have all 840 plus classes and all the properties, all the extensions and everything for schema.org in our tools. And so we're really built to help people, especially in those niche areas, use a specific class. But the specific class is really going to help you make sure that it's explicitly understood, what your niche is and exactly what you do, whether you're a medical organization, if you're in education, if you're in finance, etc. The third one is really a best practice, and you'll hear people talk about spammy schema markup, but spammy schema markup is really where you start marking up things that don't exist on the page. This is why we talk about schema markup and content strategies being really, really linked very tightly together. You should only mark up things that are on the page. And if it's not on the page, that's actually, a reason for you to go and add that content. And then once you have that content, go ahead and add that schema markup. And that's why, again, this is an iterative process. The other is one key page for each business concept. I think it was John Mueller that talked about it. It was probably, may have been almost a year ago, where he was saying, every page should have like one primary concept on it. So, ideally, you might have breadcrumbs and then sort of the main entity of the page, to use schema speak, but what is that key concept on it? What is the key thing that you want the search engines to understand about that page? And so this may influence how you organize the information on your page. May influence sort of, again, how you maybe pull in information. For that titration company, we ended up pulling documents and videos and descriptions and products all to be sort of on one primary page talking about titration. And then connect things in schema markup. So always be asking, how does this relate to other elements of the business or other things on the web? Which then kind of follows into my last one, which is relating things to Wikipedia or websites to define topics. Another one that we included in this one, which I didn't call out, but Guelph Storm is part of the Ontario Hockey League. So we were like member of Ontario Hockey League. Now here I've just used a URL, but I could also create a sports organization and add additional detail. What I'm telling the search engines here is go to the Ontario Hockey League and they'll provide you details about their organization. But again, I'm linking that together to be explicit about, which Guelph Storm are we talking about, and how do you understand how I relate to these other things on the web or on the website. So that's all the content I had for you today. What we're going to do now is go ahead and have a look at some of the question and answers. All right, sounds like there's a bunch in here. So let's go ahead and look at this one from Barry. So what do you do if the WordPress theme inserts microdata in addition to your JSON-LD, causing errors in the structured data testing tool? Well, there's actually a resource that the team here developed that helps you filter out microdata. It's available in GitHub, so we can go ahead and post that in. You can also use our Schema App plugin, and there's a checkbox that says remove microdata, and so that will help you clean it up as well. We've been doing this for a while, so that we've often tried to kind of create tips and tricks built into the things that we have available to help you filter out perhaps just like generic markup that doesn't make sense. Okay. So here we have another one from Celeste Bishop. I think my mind's going to explode is what she says. I need to build schema codes that take into account local information, voice recognition support, video and podcasts, possibly reviews as well. Is there a way to get it done with one super schema code? Great question. Complicated answer. It looks like Taylor has kind of jumped in here with some of the questions. So again, with this one, we want to talk about like, well, even if you have videos, podcasts, my question would be like, what is the primary thing that those things are about? Is there a key topic that they're talking about? Kind of go deeper than just like the channels of which that stuff is coming live, and then sort of break it down to say, is there a way to talk about perhaps that concept, and then articulate that there's these related things that are all talking about that concept. Celeste, that may be one that we want to get into some more detail or look at an example with, and then we can delve more in. Another question from Anna Finch. Could you repeat what the process would be if you're using a CMS? So there's lots and lots of different CMSs out there. In fact, I think I hear of a new one most days that someone brings up. But some of the common ones, so whether it be Drupal or WordPress, Shopify for e-commerce, BigCommerce, Magento. Really what you want to do is actually look to see if there's something perhaps built in. And so there's companies such as like Schema App who have add-ons. So we have an add-on for BigCommerce, Shopify, WordPress. And then there's also third-party tools like Schema App allows you to integrate with any CMS in order to optimize any type of content and be able to do that, at scale and integrate through a tag manager. So again, what we like to do is say, like, is there some type of add-on that's available to you that will automate that schema markup? And if that's the case, great. And then look at, again, what key concept that automates, and if it can automate it, then like what are some other tools out there? So there's generators you can use. You can write dynamic JavaScript that goes in a Google tag, or you can look for a comprehensive solution like Schema App in order to help you. It often also depends on the skills and resources you have on your team. And so perhaps we work with a lot of clients where they have very advanced SEO people, but they just have limited development resources. And so not only to be able to do the schema markup, but then maintain it on a regular basis is really difficult. So it really is that gauge of what's out of the box, what resources do you have, what's your strategy, what type of content you have, and then what's the right solution. And again, you can reach out to us at schemaapp.com if you want to go deeper, and we can tell you sort of what makes the most sense if you want to do anything specific. For service class, what is the difference between name and type? Thank you, Kelly, for your question. So for any class, like the name and type, the name is really you describing that thing. So if I were to say I do schema markup consulting, and that's a service I offer, the service is the type, and the name is perhaps Schema App, Schema Markup Consulting. So the name is really what you call it, whereas the type is more part of the standard within schema.org. Okay, let's do, does organization go on the home page or on the contact page? Thank you, Patricia, for your question. So I tend to think organization is, what is the primary page talking about the company, right? So it's usually the home page. Now, what I like to do on the contact page is actually put the contact point on the contact page. And then you can link those things together because an organization has a contact point. And so I tend to separate those things. Within schema.org, there is also contact page, and then a contact page can be about a contact point. That seems like a waste of effort when you can actually just say that the contact point is the way we sort of describe a contact information within schema.org. One other one, do you have a community and or list of Schema App users who provide contracting work? Well, Nick, great question. You should ask that. We've just launched our partner program, and that will be coming soon. In the meantime, if you do want to know sort of who those people are, you can reach out to us at info@schemaapp.com or just fill out our contact page on our website. Yeah, we're happy to share sort of who does that work. All right, Tim from Italy, ciao. We are a tour operator, and last time I checked, Schema for tour operations was being developed. Some say, okay, use it, take the risk. Others, they say use products or events. Your thoughts would be appreciated. So this is really one of those trade-off questions, right? So within pending, they now have some tourist schema markup. So some of these are sort of tourist locations. So if we follow sort of best practices around schema.org, we ask, what is the most specific schema markup class to use? And in that case, I would say use pending, right? Like it's going ahead and describing that very specifically for what you're doing. However, the Google features, if you're trying to get a Google feature and you believe it's closer to an event or a product, and let's perhaps say it's an event that you're running, and it makes sense that that's an event, and you want to try to achieve that Google feature versus just explaining that specifically, then you might try the event. This is really one of those areas where you have to sort of test and see if you get the results you want. However, the purist in me would say sort of, be most specific and then try to link it to an event or to a product that's perhaps related. All right, so I'll let people ask a couple more questions. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to share a little bit about who we are. So Schema App, we do knowledge graphs, and Schema Markup is what we do every day, all day. And we really love to partner with people who want to get into sort of everything around Schema Markup. Our goal is to give you more time to drink coffee and less time having to write code and do Schema Markup. And we do that by sort of providing you simple and scalable tools that work on any CMS across any content type, by empowering digital marketing teams to get stuff done quickly. We love the fact that we can get things done in a day, a week, with very little time or no time from IT and developers. We really try to be cost efficient so that you can refocus your technical team on high value tasks, as well as invest in sort of your team learning how to do Schema Markup. And again, we monitor Schema Markup health and help you make updates in minutes. So sort of nuanced questions like this, again, are things that we're constantly reading up to date and then sort of trying to build into our tools to make your life easier. Most people think of us in the area of Schema Markup, but we actually, because we build it like a knowledge graph, we can actually use it to also enhance analytics. And 2019 is a super exciting year for us because we'll actually be building not just ways that you can add Schema Markup into your analytics, which is called enhanced analytics, core and custom reports, but we'll be also helping you gauge sort of, is it working? Google Search Console got rid of their structured data report, and so we're looking to say like, well, how do we complement that but by providing you understanding of what Schema Markup you have out there, and really get value outside of just SEO, answer questions with data by structuring your analytics. The funniest story is we're using this right now in our team, and Mark is sort of, gauging to try to, make sure he's getting more page views than other team members, because we can actually look at our Google Analytics by author of blog. And then the last piece that we're really passionate about, and if you've listened to my podcast or Search Talk Live, I often talk about, how if you do Schema Markup properly in a knowledge graph, you can reuse it to accelerate other initiatives such as chatbots, AI, and virtual reality. What people got most excited about over this past year is in 2018, we launched our highlighter, which allows you to optimize templates in minutes without ever having to write code. And so if you haven't seen this, you can just Google Schema App Highlighter. It's a really powerful tool that works, again, across any CMS, any type of content, and really sort of allows you to get this job done, making your Schema Markup strategy come to life. We love hearing from our customers and sharing sort of the knowledge we have. This is only the first of many webinars that we hope to have to really play out our company value around not just being apt about us learning and staying on top of it, but sharing that with the SEO community. So please feel free to, you'll get a survey sort of asking for feedback, also asking you to give us guidance on what you want training on next, and we will take those to heart. I will read them all. And you can also follow me on Twitter or Schema App at Schema App Tool, and we share a lot of our resources and capabilities there around what we're seeing, what we're excited about, or what's changing. So we have a couple more minutes. I'll take a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. So let me go here. Patricia. Oh, you got that one. Okay. Is there? Okay. Patricia is asking, I've seen publisher bloggers at rating kind of fudged. Oh, I just lost it. Oh, it disappeared. I think, yeah, I got it. Okay, let's go back to Trisha. Jeff was too fast helping answer questions for me. Thank you, Jeff. All right, scrolling, lots of great questions. Here it is, okay. So we're seeing bloggers add kind of fudge to every article page. Is that good? So ratings. So we believe like ratings should be proper ratings, right? And associated to that blog. What we've seen often is people pulling in, ratings, I was going to say, so local business ratings is interesting. I'll get to publishers in a second. So one thing that there's been lots of debate over the last year is whether you can pull in third-party ratings onto your website and link there and get a rich snippet. And we have seen that work. You won't necessarily get it in your knowledge card, but there is ways to do it. So if you Google third-party ratings, Schema App, you'll see Mark's blog on that to describe how you pull that in. we're an honest company. So we believe, fudging anything isn't the right thing to do, that it's actually most important to be true and transparent. And so you'll see that in sort of how we talk about things. But I think the same applies for ratings and publishers. Google's getting smarter, right? Like these bots are becoming intelligent, right? All this talk about AI, that I think, fudging anything is dangerous if you actually value sort of the traffic and value that engagement that you're getting through search. So I would say, take the high road. There are great widgets that you can do in order to get that done. All right, so we're out of time here. So thank you all for joining us for our first training webinar. We, again, really look forward to your feedback. We just got some great Schema App shirts that say "I speak to machines" on the back. If you fill out the feedback, we'll be selecting some people to win a Schema App t-shirt. And we look forward to your feedback on what we should do in our next training. Thanks so much for coming, and have a great day.